there's all these stories about, guys over in Macedonia who are running these fake news sites.
Number 24 is Content Farms in Macedonia.
Бидејќи ако се направи грешка, таа ќе биде кобна. Нема враќање назад.
So Europe need to remain more sexy lady in the world. Ajde, majkата!
Господа ја чува Македонија и низините граѓани.
I don't have a cold open here, and I'm not prepared like Saturday Night Live to sing the Ukrainian national anthem, which I thought was quite interesting. But we can go with I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Chilimanov in Skopje, Macedonia.
And we are the Macedonian Content Farmers, and today is the last day of February 28. There is no February 29 this year.
Or the last day of history, if things.
That might be it might be the last day of history, exactly. So I saw a very funny meme yesterday saying that you vow to not drink alcohol on February 29, 30, and 31 of this year. So you can tell people that. They'll applaud you for that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, maybe it is the last day of history. I don't think so, not quite yet. There is a non-trivial chance, I believe, of first use of nuclear weapons in history, I think.
But third use.
Third use. Oh yeah. So sorry. Yeah. Okay. Yes, that's true. Yeah, that's right. We've used them twice before. So, thank you. I forgot about that. But yesterday was quite extraordinary, Svetlin, and today's Monday. Sunday, the Germans vow to rearm. Putin orders his nuclear deterrent to be moved to a higher state of readiness. The European Union says that it will now provide, not through the EU, but through individual EU countries, it will provide fighter jets to Ukraine, primarily from Poland, Slovakia, and Bulgaria, MiGs, so that I assume Ukrainian jet fighters can go to Bulgaria, Poland, Slovakia, hop in the cockpit, and just fly right over. It's a kind of turnkey, one and done.
Yeah, it's going to be like when the Americans gave jets to the British by leaving them on the border with Canada so the British could tow them into Canada by horses and then fly them.
Exactly, yes. There's a very good scene in Darkest Hour, I think.
Yeah.
Churchill and the brilliant Gary Oldman, who played Churchill in that, is having a conversation with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. I think he's in the water closet in the toilet talking to him on the phone. And there's that scene which is just devastating for Churchill. But yes. The EU said that their citizens could go with their blessings to fight in Ukraine, and Ukraine said that they would welcome them. Vladimir
Which
Putin
was a criminal
deployed...
offense in Syria, if you remember.
Where? In Syria?
In Syria. It was a major no-no.
Oh, okay. Yeah. It's kind of like, it's akin to the French Foreign Legion, essentially, in my opinion, from what I see. Then Putin has deployed thermobaric weapons to Ukraine, which will incinerate entire groups of people. They're they're one of the most powerful conventional weapons known to mankind.
Yeah.
What else? Those are the kind of the highlights. Of course, as we speak right now, it is almost 8:30 in the morning, my time, 4:30 p.m. your time. There are talks going on near the border between Ukraine and Belarus. So it's just, and of course, I think, obviously, the extremely dense fog of war prevails, and it's very hard when you read the Twitters, even when you turn on the tube, to figure out what's true and what's not. And you really have to dig deeply to try and get a sense of what's going on. I've got a number of I think, are trusted outlets and individuals that I follow on the Twitters that I think are what they're saying is pretty much true. But it's still very difficult to find out what's going on. I think we can say reasonably the facts are that Putin thought that this would be easy, that he could roll in there, that he could demonize the leadership of Ukraine, and the Ukrainians would believe that and welcome him as a liberator. The Ukrainians have been putting up incredible resistance. The sanctions that the West is putting on Russia and Putin will hurt, but it'll take time for them to hurt. Obviously, we're seeing bank runs in Russia. The ruble has crashed, etc. Stuff that, and the financial sanctions I'm not entirely sure about. Airspace is closed, things of that nature. But since we are the Macedonian content farmers, let's tie this in a little bit with Macedonia. Obviously, I'm following the news in Macedonia. You're writing the news in Macedonia. Everything's kind of taken a back step to this planet-wide, worldwide. But obviously, Macedonians there's I guess a kinship both with the Ukrainians and the Russians on a number of fronts. And obviously, Macedonia has diplomatic ties with both countries, embassies in both countries. There are Macedonians in both countries. I know I've seen reports of Macedonians coming out of Ukraine or trying to come out of Ukraine.
Yep.
But on the social media wars, the Twitters and things like that, it's fascinating to me, at least, to see folks, Macedonians, taking the side of Vladimir Putin, and obviously some have taken the side of Ukraine. And so let's do this just for fun, since we agree so much on this podcast. Let's see if there's any areas of disagreement we might have. Polite disagreement, of course, because we believe in that civilized conversation. I come at it from the standpoint of Vladimir Putin has said the Ukrainians as a people, as an identity, don't exist. And he is prepared to go in there and not only say they don't exist, but he's prepared to kill them if they say they exist. And he'll start with the decapitation of the government of Ukraine, President Zelensky and the leadership there. And I find that to be absolutely abhorrent. Now, we can talk about, and I know that, I've seen Macedonians bring up the Azov Battalion, which has a very sordid history. But on the flip side, and this is not whataboutism, on the flip side, you've got the Wagner Group out of Russia. You've got the Chechen homicidal maniac warlord Ramzan Kadyrov, who is an Islamist. Though he's not he's probably a practicing Muslim, but he doesn't live like a good Muslim. So he's a scumbag, and his fighters are known for their ruthlessness. So then I get the point of Macedonians who said this was a colored revolution that put in Zelensky in power in the first place. We can go back and talk about 2014 and the events and Victoria Nuland and John McCain and all those guys. But tell me how you see it from there, from Macedonia.
Yeah, it's very difficult. This is obviously going to be the Ukraine episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast. And as you said, we definitely have very close ties to both nations. Both are Orthodox Slavic nations, Ukrainians mostly Orthodox. So, there is a lot of even intermarriage, some travel, a lot of, business links, mostly with Ukraine, which is closer, but also a lot with Russia. People would point out that Ukraine was the only country which provided us with weapons and serious weapons like tactical aircraft to hit ground targets and attack helicopters in 2001 when we were attacked by the Albanians. But then, some would say, okay, this means we should support Ukraine. Others would say, yes, but this was a very pro-Russian government in Ukraine at the time, before the first orange or colored revolution, which brought Yushchenko, that guy, remember, who was being poisoned then by the Russians, apparently. So it was, we would say, okay, yes, but we were being armed by Russia through Ukraine by proxy. So this is one early quick item which was being raised to appeal to Macedonia's more patriotic side to support Ukraine. Obviously, the more left-wing, the pro-Western, pro-American side in Macedonia, they all support Ukraine. They have their marching orders, and they would say, not only they would post a few pictures and the Ukrainian flag, and then immediately they would turn on the right, on the conservative side, and they would accuse them, okay, but you're being silent during this ghoulish invasion of Ukraine by Russia, so you need to speak out. So this was obviously a political attempt by the left to again score points with the US embassy and to say, please don't replace us yet, even though we began to lose elections and we're incredibly corrupt and we cannot really accomplish anything. Please don't replace us with the right, which is more popular, more competent, etc., because they are going to side with Russia in this war. And then Vimera then overcorrected. So after being, I think they left the first day without a response, when only the foreign minister had a response. This was, I think, the first day of the declaration of independence of the two republics by Putin. So Vimera did not respond immediately. So the next day, they started saying we support the territorial integrity, and then they are now even demanding that the parliament adopts a resolution on safeguarding the integrity of Ukraine, and as well on safeguarding the identity of Gotsadelchov, which is the previous Vimera demand in parliament. So they are now, the two main parties in the country are taking the position that they condemn the Russian invasion and are for the territorial integrity of Ukraine. But in the case of Vimera, it's to some extent forced by the US embassy. I mean, that much is clear. It's not. And this obviously translates into a lot of the people. The political division would be, as it translates among the population. There are some on the left, surprisingly, who sided with Russia. I didn't see them coming. They're not like important media outlets or anything like that, but we're talking like well-known SDSM supporters in the public eye. There are some on Vimera side who are outspoken in condemning Russia in what you said. Very clear legal case, invasion of a country which helped us in 2001. Again, we're disputing what regime was in charge in Ukraine at the time, and which is being denied its right to identify like national identity, self-determination, much like the Greeks and the Bulgarians are now doing to us. But broadly, the division among the SDSM and Vimera is SDSM are going to support the US. They see nothing wrong in the colored revolution. They think that the US controlling Ukraine is fine, it's great, through their embassy, with all the evidence of horrific corruption and the fact that it did not materialize in any, I guess, material progress for the country under the US. Much like here in Macedonia, we didn't see much change now that we are in NATO. In fact, things are getting worse. While on the Vimera side, the position would be after the US State Department and the diplomats engineered the war in 2001 in Macedonia, which is by now widely accepted. To the extent that people think about it and talk about it, it's that the US was heavily involved in this, that we were attacked from a NATO territory of Kosovo. Then the US obviously engineered the 2015 Colored Revolution that further weakened Macedonian national identity, the Macedonian nation state. They would say, okay, now the US is doing the same tricks in Ukraine and it's trying to divide and split the Slavic world, the largest Slavic country, and whoever it could get to work against the largest Slavic country, against Russia. And it's obviously couched in a position that is tragic. The sooner it ends, the better. That the Ukrainians obviously did not want this, did not want to poke the bear. The Russians, obviously, as a nation, do not want this type of response. If you would ask the people broadly, I mean, I don't know how they would respond. I mean, I'm actually scared to think how both sides would respond, especially the Russians, if you would poll all of them or, realistically poll the people. But we like to think that both sides would not want a war and that it would end quickly. how it would end and how they should develop in the future, nobody knows. I mean, I'm obviously falling more on the second position, that this was years and years of persistent American interference, meddling in a country in which obviously it was not doing well. Well, it was Russian dominated economically, politically, but now it's in a war. And it wouldn't have been if Trump was president, it wouldn't have been if it weren't for the two colored revolutions. So
it wouldn't have been if we, the United States, had not pulled out disastrously out of Afghanistan in the fashion in which we did. I think that sent a signal. I think it's true in throughout history that weakness invites aggression in whatever way. And when we pulled out of Afghanistan, the way we pulled out of Afghanistan, which was a disaster, which the Biden administration still won't admit, Vladimir Putin and the world, others saw that as a sign of weakness. So yes, all those factors I think contributed. I think you're right, and I think we need to admit, I think even those who do believe that this is an absolutely disastrous war unnecessary war started by Vladimir Putin, would agree that Russia has valid security concerns, that those need to be addressed. And I am not knowledgeable enough to be able to tell you that they were or were not being addressed. If you look at the broad sweep of history, obviously Russia has been invaded many times, going back to the Swedes in the 1200s, and then Napoleon, and then obviously Hitler. The siege of Leningrad, if you read about it or watch documentaries, is absolutely horrific. The Russian people have suffered greatly, especially in the last century, at the hands of others and at the hands of their own people. So you can't just dismiss that out of hand. Pivoting slightly to a couple of other things, I think it was in rapid succession here, and not necessarily in any particular order. I noticed that the Kosovo president demanded immediate NATO membership. And I know the Ukrainians are demanding immediate EU membership. And I'm sure the Macedonians would have something to say about both of those.
Some guys were joking that we're now inviting Russian forces into our territory as a shortcut to EU membership.
Exactly, yeah. Not something you want. It is interesting, when you take a step back and you look at the bigger picture. Obviously, the geopolitical West has condemned and united on this as never before. I mean, when the Germans start arming again, you know that something's going on. But there's other countries that haven't. I mean, obviously China. I don't recall seeing a statement from the Chinese government actually condemning it. There may have been, there may not have been, but they're
Broadly,
obviously
broad strokes.
Yeah. But they're lukewarm in it for a whole bunch of reasons, which we can talk about. But other countries, India, South Africa, Egypt.
India was a surprise for me.
Yeah, the broader Muslim world. So other countries are not on board. Obviously, the UN Security Council, the 5 permanent members, which includes Russia, did not vote to condemn.
Chaired by Russia now.
Right.
Russia is the chairman.
Yeah. How ironic.
I think, or they just chaired the first meeting. I'm not sure.
Yeah. No, I'm not sure of that either. But yes, it is fascinating to see the world reaction and how others are not necessarily condemning it. And then, of course, let's talk about China, because does this make China more hesitant in their eventual attempt to take over Taiwan, or does this embolden them? I'm of two minds on that, and I can. I think a lot depends on the resistance that you'll see from the Chinese on Taiwan. And I don't know what that is. I just don't know enough about it. Again, going back to what I said earlier, I think that the Russian government, Vladimir Putin in particular, were surprised by the resistance from the Ukrainians. But on Chinese on Taiwan, I don't know.
So listen, of all these items, probably the most important one for me is Germany announcing it's going to start buying hundreds of billions of weaponry from, it's going to arm itself, and obviously it's going to buy American, I guess, its own weaponry, but out of those 100 billion, a lot of it, I'm sure, is going to go to American manufacturing companies. So, I mean, my response here was, maybe now that this is accomplished, the richest country in Europe going to rearm itself, canceling Nord Stream, maybe buying American LNG in the future, and etc. maybe the Americans will allow the Ukrainians to surrender. It's a tongue-in-cheek comment, but we gotta entertain the idea that the U.S. and Russia are probably both gonna get what they want out of this, what they really want, and that maybe both are not really that opposed to the things that are transpiring here. The U.S. obviously pushed, Russia obviously responded in a way which is criminal to its core. But in the end, Russia could end up gaining territories which it considers the birthplace of its historic birthplace of its country, Kiev and Rus, the Donbass industrial region, Crimea is obviously theirs now, expanded Odessa, all these glories of Catherine the Great, etc. While the U.S. on the other side now has a raison d'être for the NATO alliance. Nobody can now say, as we would in this podcast so often and lightly, that NATO is useless, obsolete organization. Now everybody needs to listen to them. They are now undisputed rulers of the continent, of the western part of the continent. Even, we're very close to having even minor media outlets like this podcast being shut down because, this is going to be not going fully along with the Western narrative, and Ukraine is pretty soon, I think, going to be as much, even more dangerous than not wearing a mask and while you walk toward the restaurant before you take it off, before you sit down. So both sides may end up getting what they want, and obviously, the war in Syria was not enough to provoke this reaction among the European countries because it's now widely discussed issue that Europeans apparently react differently when blue-eyed, blonde-haired people are getting killed than when it was the Syrians. And it's, both sides may end up winning to the point that, we could discuss if this was something that was agreed, and the fact that there is no, American sanctions on energy exports from Russia, something that, the U.S. could easily supply, at least for itself, and at least the oil could be easily supplied, if not the gas, I think, with the pumping capacity in the U.S., which was being shut down. So they're serious. It's a lot of bluster. It's a lot of rhetoric, but there are things not being done that could end this more quickly, and there are maybe a lot of glad handing in the background, which we're not seeing between both sides. Ukraine is not obviously a participant in this war. It is the participant in the war, but it's not the actual fighting power. It's now a proxy for whole of the West, for the U.S., for the British, and then to a lesser extent Germans, Italians, French, etc. Poland, of course, and the Baltics. So I don't know. my first position was I hope they now that I was hoping that they would put on a tough face for Russia that it maybe does not attack. Now that it has attacked, I hope they collapse quickly and surrender quickly, because I don't want to see that country devastated and destroyed, and then hopefully the sanctions would get Russia to accept some kind of like a fair agreement on what would the future of that country look like. But now that they crossed the Rubicon, again, these are both friendly, brotherly nations as we consider them here, and I want this to stop. I don't have any way possible.
Right. No, I completely agree with you. Yeah, with innocent people are dying, and that needs to stop. On the issue of, you mentioned that you wanted to see basically correct me if I'm wrong here, the Ukrainian government collapse and then sanctions over time to convince Putin to reverse course.
Well, yeah, not to overextend. He's certainly not going to take the Lvov region, but then it's a matter of question what to do with the rest. Is there going to be like a rump Ukraine in the middle around Kiev? and he takes the coast and the Donbass. Is he going to leave even the coast to Ukraine and then just take the two republics he declared and Crimea? I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, I think Vladimir Putin has demonstrated in words and deeds that he wants to go into Kyiv, decapitate the leadership, install his own regime, and then, and then leave a garrison wherever that needs to hold it. I think that's pretty obvious. That's what his stated intention is, and that would involve the killing of a lot of leaders and probably their families as well if they haven't fled. So the problem with that, though, I think, is the Ukrainians themselves have just demonstrated over the past week, less than a week, is that they will never allow that to happen. Whatever puppet regime Vladimir Putin theoretically installed in Kyiv would never be able to hold the country, no matter. It would be it would be urban guerrilla warfare, war of attrition. It would be akin to, my closest example that I know would be the Estonian Forest Brothers, who battled the various occupying forces, first the Germans and then the Russians, in their country through all those years, just literally sniping at them, and he wouldn't be able to hold it. At the same time, you got to consider what's going on back home in Russia. With obviously, we've seen the scenes of the protests and people being arrested and things like that. I've seen reports of oligarchs that are expressing their displeasure, and we don't know what's going on within Putin's inner circle, wherever that might be stationed right now. I don't know if it's in Moscow or someplace in the Urals or wherever, some bunker deep below. But I mean, the man has obviously grown quite paranoid over the years. I think he has, this is my own belief, I think he has a terminal illness that he knows about, and this is his last attempt to do something to make his mark in history. He famously said, 10 years ago, that the greatest disaster of the 20th century was the dissolution of the Soviet Union. And he also said in 2004, there is no such thing as a former KGB man. So it's funny, I was talking to an Estonian friend of mine last week who's pretty high up in his Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he told me unprompted, he said, you know what, I think Putin has a terminal illness. And, we've seen more and more people start to talk about this. It's entirely possible. But the more that he's slowed down in his attempt to take over Ukraine, I think the more the sanctions and everything else that's going on, the more desperate he's going to become. It's not out of the realm. I always like talking about possible and probable, two different things. Everything is possible. Not everything is probable. So it's entirely possible he could go completely mad and use nuclear weapons in Ukraine or on a NATO country. If he does it on a NATO country, it's game over for everybody.
All of us.
Yeah. No, the Chinese will emerge victorious because they will be unscathed. But if he doesn't take Ukraine, Kyiv, and the rest of Ukraine, what are his own people going to do at home? Are there going to be people in his own inner circle that decide to, knock him off? And then, beyond that, let's just say, theoretically speaking, that Putin was gone. I don't think we should assume that the next guy is going to be nicer. Yeah. It could be much worse. And then, here's one other thing I want to say on this. I think, at some point, obviously, Vladimir Putin will no longer lead Russia. That's just a fact. Yeah. We all die. But if it comes sooner than what would be a normal lifespan, and if it comes in a violent way, one way or the other, my fear is that the political West will engage in triumphalism, as we have seen us do so many times before. We did in the early 90s at the collapse of the Soviet Union. And I think, this is just a theory, and I'd like to get your reaction on it, that the progressive left in the West will use this as an excuse then to further push their agenda. I mean, take for example, the shutting down of Russian media in I don't know if it's all the EU or just certain EU countries, as well as the banking crackdown, the SWIFT disconnecting from SWIFT. What's to stop in a post-Putin world? What's to stop the EU from doing those things in, say, Poland or Hungary because and I'm using scare quotes here, the wrong government is elected.
Of course.
I think that's entirely possible, and we've seen a precursor of that with Justin Trudeau in Canada, freezing. The government didn't freeze the bank accounts. The government can't do that. The government hinted strongly, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more, to banks. You ought to shut down the bank accounts of these truckers, which is devastating to the truckers and their families, and highly illegal, according to everything that I've read and seen. So that's my fear, is that in a post-Putin world, if he goes sooner rather than later in a violent way, and there's triumphalism and dancing in the West, that'll be a major issue that will disrupt and afflict the West for some time to come.
Yeah, of course, that's a given. I mean, on one hand, Putin is old, Erdogan is old, and they are both, Erdogan took Nagorno-Karabakh. Now, there is talk there about northern Cyprus, like annexing it as Putin did Crimea. And then, the leader leaves, and in the case of Putin, maybe he grabs as much as he can of Ukraine, then he leaves. Obviously, Russia is going to be a pariah under him, but then he installs somebody else who would obviously say, listen, I can't go back on this, what was done, but let's try to, appease things in other ways that we can. The West is triumphant now on the resistance in Ukraine. Again, me considering both nations close, I want this to end quickly. I mean, what the Russia is committing are not a lot of troops. They do not have that many troops, and they're not committing that many troops. In a country of 40 million, in a city of 3 million, they're encircling it with, 50,000 soldiers? It's ridiculous. So I'm guessing they're hoping of being welcomed as liberators in at least some parts of the country, like Kharkov, and even this is apparently not happening. And then installing some kind of figurehead who would be more pro-Russian in the future. That's why, removing Zelensky in the first charge would have been the best option to avoid bloodshed. And once the tanks have started rolling, the best option would have been avoiding war altogether. But now the West is triumphant, and they're giving weapons to the Russians. Look, we've stopped them. Whereas, somebody pointed out that it took, I don't know how many weeks for the U.S. Army to roll over open terrain without any consideration for at least the troops. You have to consider that in the case of Russia, they might even have some consideration even for the soldiers, apart from the Azov, the most hardline Ukrainian soldiers. They would still consider the normal conscripts as somebody you don't want to kill because his mother, father, his brother then is your enemy. So, it's not realistic to expect that they'll take Kiev with such small forces in days when it took the U.S. weeks to reach Baghdad. But then once they have committed, maybe they will not be able to take the cities, which are, obviously concrete death traps, but they can easily take out electricity, water, and then just by definition, the cities will be starved out. So then, you just negotiate for a few days and hopefully, I don't know. I'm just saying this horrible stream of things in such casual tone because we have actually seen it in here in Macedonia to a low extent. I've seen it I've been to Sarajevo, I've been to Srebrenica, to Zagreb, etc. We had a major city in Macedonia deprived of water in the peak summer by, de facto, U.S.-supported Albanian groups from Kosovo. So you mentioned Estonia. Now, I would consider it a duty to fight a foreign nation invader. Like we have Greeks, we have with whom we share religious kinship, but after all our history, and as two different nations, obviously we don't like each other, or Albanians. I would consider fighting a kin of religious and ethnicity over ideology. So, the Estonians were fighting the Russians both on the grounds of this is an alien nation, alien religion, who are coming to enslave us, and how many of them were deported by Stalin in Siberia, etc. And then the country was settled with Russians forcibly. Now Russia obviously raises the minority rights issue here, and to a much greater extent in Ukraine, and to some extent, especially in Ukraine, they have some ground to stand on. But even if the Estonians were purely Russians and Orthodox Christian, it would still be worth fighting the Soviet army because they were communists, and I would definitely consider it a duty to fight an evil ideology. At the moment, Russia does not espouse this ideology. The Russian part of Ukraine will be poorer than the American, or let's say a Russian-ran Ukraine under Yanukovych or Kuchma, would be poorer than Yushchenko, or what was his name, Yatsenyuk, or whatever, Zelensky, Poroshenko ran Ukraine. But they would not be ideologically different. They would both be corrupt kleptocracies in which a foreign power determines the ruler, in one case the US embassy, in another case the Russian embassy, varying degrees of media freedom, ability to conduct business, travel, etc. But it wouldn't be such a fundamental change. So if I were, a Ukrainian now, my readiness to resist would probably depend on my family's national background, how far east I am, how committed we were to either Ukrainian freedom. Have we lost family members in the Holodomor or not? Was our village attacked more by the Russian gangs or more by the Ukrainian gangs during some of the back and forth occupations? And in Macedonia at the moment, it's something similar. We have pro-Serbian, we have pro-Bulgarian alliances within the Macedonians, and my readiness to offer resistance to a Serbian or a Bulgarian occupier would not be the same as that if we're talking about a Greek or an Albanian.
Right.
So it's a different nation. I get your point. I mean, I had fun pointing out to the Bulgarian prime minister when he said we stand with Russia, with Ukraine, blah, 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 that, I quoted portions of Putin's speech to him in a tweet. And I had some people saying, yeah, okay, get your point. That, the position Bulgaria takes toward Macedonia, it's an artificial nation. It was invented by Tito, 1945. And then Putin says, okay, Ukraine is an artificial
nation
invented, yeah.
by Lenin. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's also some degree, not of truth to that, but I would not consider myself existentially threatened by either of these two nations, as I would by the Greeks and the Albanians. So again, in Ukraine, I know that for many it's a matter of life or death. For some, it's probably replacing one corrupt kleptocrat, whether I'll be ruled by Putin's son-in-law or by Biden's idiot drug addict son, who would control my business, and or his friends he has acquired in Ukraine would control me, etc. I mean, I don't know. It's not the free world against communist totalitarianism. It might be in China. It definitely would be in in North Korea or maybe Venezuela. But I'm not really seeing it here to that extent.
Right. Yeah. No, I get your points. They're all well taken. Obviously, I think we want to see the war end quickly because innocent people, families, women, children, are dying needlessly. And, but I think it's also fair to say that that's not necessarily going to happen right away, even though I see, I'm just scrolling through the Twitters here right now, and the talks are entering their 6th hour now between the Ukrainians and the Russians near the Belarusian border. How this is going to play out, I don't know. I think the longer the Ukrainians resist, the worse it is going to be for Vladimir Putin and his inner circle, and the more desperate he will become. I think that's a reasonable statement. And what he does, I don't know.
Yeah, I was surprised he didn't go for more territory in 2014 was Crimea and Donbass immediately. I was actually surprised at how little he carved out. I mean, knowing how at least they consider Kharkiv and of course Odessa. And now I'm reading some reports that the people in Kharkov, whatever it's, have become jaded against Russia and they're no longer considering themselves, Russian first, Ukrainian second, to the extent they did before. So yeah, I mean, he may definitely have bitten off more than he can chew, but now that he committed, I don't see how he loses militarily to the extent that, if things drag on, they're going to begin to get more and more bad for the civilians. So
Yeah, but you also need to consider Russian troop morale. My understanding of the troops in the north versus the troops in the south, the troops in the south are more of a cohesive units based on their training and how long they've been together and things like that. Where the units in the north come from various different regions, and it's kind of a hodgepodge group of various divisions put together that don't have that unified spirit in terms of fighting. So, and plus the information war that's going on all sides. It's I have to as a PR guy, I have to give it to the Ukrainians. Their PR machine is very, very fine tuned, very good.
I don't think Russia is actually doing much in terms of PR. I haven't seen much in terms of either we're advancing or I saw some pictures of Ukrainians ostensibly shelling Donbass. Other than that, but then all the big stories were quickly debunked, like the sailors who made the Baston, up yours response to the Russians, and were then killed, and then turns out
they're not. No, they were taken captive actually.
Yeah, the woman with the bloodied face, she turned out to be a German woman. The ghost of Kiev. Somebody was posting a picture of Zaev on that American aircraft carrier with the. This is the.
I missed that one.
If you were wondering where the guy is, I'm the ghost of Kiev. It's all quickly being debunked, and even there is even then a response. Well, look, the Russians were hiding the truth about the sailors to unnerve their. No, I mean, okay, you lied. It's not even the Ukrainians doing it. Let's be real. It's Langley and it's Pentagon putting this out, and it was okay. You lied. You got caught on it. Thank God they're alive. But then something real is going to happen. Like there is this horrible footage from Kharkov today, and you don't know. Do we take it for granted? I don't know anymore.
Yeah. Well, let's leave it at that. I mean, we're recording this early morning. Well, 9:05 my time right now, so it's 5:05 your time. Hopefully we'll get this out today because things on the ground obviously change quite quickly. So who knows what tomorrow is going to be. And maybe we'll revisit this sooner. I think it's been 3 weeks since we've done a podcast.
Yeah.
Almost 3 weeks. So maybe we'll revisit it sooner, maybe not. Obviously, in terms of domestic politics, other than what you mentioned earlier, things are a little bit more low key, at least from my vantage point. Because people are kind of stopping and waiting and watching and holding their breath and waiting to see if there will be a tomorrow, or if that's the end of the world as we know it, to quote the REM.
Yeah. I mean, this was going to be our Ukraine podcast because the only thing we can contribute, other than our amateurish, military. Now we're switching from being COVID experts.
I've seen those memes.
Blitzkrieg. Yeah.
Yes, I'm no longer an expert in epidemiology and virology. I'm now an expert in foreign policy. So. Yeah.
I mean, we can just give an insight on how Macedonians and Ugro-Estonian Arizonians are viewing this.
Although, here's a fun fact. I was actually slated, I lived in Macedonia from 96 to 2003, and in late 2002, I was supposed to move to Ukraine, to Kyiv, to work on a project there, and fell through at the last minute. So I've been to Ukraine 6 or 7 times.
So this was before their first Orange Revolution, right?
Yes, yeah. So, and I've been, like I said, I've been there 6 or 7 times. I think I've got I do have a good friend there. He's a lawyer. He's in his mid 40s, so I'm checking in on him to make sure he's okay. He's in Kyiv. And I've got a couple of friends, American friends that have worked over there. So I need to check in. They're not there now, but I want to
Of course.
keep tabs and see what's going on.
You were not supposed to be a tea tester for Yushchenko, right?
No.
Okay, that's good. That would have been dangerous.
Yes, exactly. So, no, but it's, and I was only in Kyiv, so I never got to see the rest of the countryside, but obviously beautiful, beautiful city with such an incredible history and culture and everything else. So, I really enjoyed my time there. So,
yeah.
All right. Well, we will keep tabs on this, and and we'll
God be with them all.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. So always good talking to you, Svetlin.
You too, buddy. Take care.